I'm Charlie Patton. I'm a staff writer with the Times Union. The story I've got in Tuesday's paper concerns Annie Lytle School, which is an old public school, originally called Public School Number 4. It sits over at the edge of Brooklyn. It originally overlooked Riverside Park, but in the 1950s, the Jacksonville Expressway, which is now I-95, was built, cutting it off from the park. For many years after it closed as a school in 1960 and then was pretty much abandoned as a building in 1970. You used to be able to see it as you approached the Fuller Warren Bridge from the north. It was sitting there sort of looking down over I-95, very striking looking building, neoclassical columns in front, real interesting looking building. I remember at one point there were signs up that it was being developed as condos, and I remember looking at it and saying, that'd be an interesting building to live in, although it would have been right on top of the interstate. What happened is about a decade ago, the Fuller Warren Bridge was replaced with a different bridge. The bridge now instead of looking over the bridge, the school looks under the approaches to the bridge. That's almost over top of the school now. Anyway, a private foundation bought the school in 1980 with the idea of developing it first into a senior citizens home. That fell through for various reasons. They were going to turn it into a sort of nonprofit civic center. That fell through. As I said, for a while it was going to be condos. That fell through. Everything fell through. About 2 years ago, there was a plan to actually demolish the building and build a retirement home there. The city council committee approved the plan to demolish the building. Then people became aware of what was about to happen, got upset because it is now designated a historic landmark. The company that had the contract to build there backed off on that plan, and for the last 2 years, there's been no change in status. Meanwhile, on some of the local blogs, people had begun to write about what's going on with Annie Lytle. We're worried about the school. The roof's fallen in. It's in deteriorating condition. How can they allow this to happen to the building? I finally talked to Doug Milne, who is the chairman of the board of trustees of the Ida M. Stevens Foundation, which is a subsidiary of that foundation, actually owns the property now. And Doug said that no, the building is not falling apart, that it was built in such a way constructed out of concrete and brick that even though their roof has collapsed, it's not suffering from the water damage. It remains structurally sound. There is still a plan in place to build a retirement home, and the current plans do call for saving the existing structure and incorporating that into the new structure. Lynn Fournier of the company that has the contract to develop the property said that she thinks that they may be ready to move on it in as soon as 2 months. So at the moment, there's reason to be optimistic about the future of Annie Lytle. The other story that's going to run in conjunction with Annie Lytle is a story about what's called mid-century modern, which is a style of architecture that I really hadn't been. I guess I was aware of the style, but I hadn't heard of this movement for mid-century modern. We think of the Gulf Life Tower in Jacksonville, or the old Hayden Burns Library, or there's a building called the Fletcher Building at the corner of Post and Riverside. These are all distinctive looking, maybe not striking in the way we think of older buildings like Annie Lytle, but there's historic preservationists are beginning to look at these buildings and say these have intrinsic value as architecture. They're beginning to approach the age. 50 years is when you start considering a building eligible to be considered a historic landmark. Maybe we should take a look at whether these buildings are worth preserving. And there's actually going to be a conference on this May 1st at the Comer, where a lot of the really top architects that worked in Jacksonville during this period, Robert Broward, Taylor Hardwick, who did the Downtown Library and Friendship Park, George Fisher, who was working during that time, and William Morgan are going to sit down and talk about this style of architecture. It should be an interesting day. So hopefully people will find something to respond to in those stories.